This is Amy Morin, the author of 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. Remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?
Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Welcome to Success is a Choice podcast. I'm your host, Jamy Bechler, and we are very excited to have Emily Chapman Richards on the show today. Emily is the Vice President of Show Hope, an organization whose mission is to care for orphans and reduce barriers to adoption. Show Hope was founded by Emily's parents, Stephen Curtis and Mary Beth Chapman. If those names sound familiar, it's because her mother is a New York Times bestselling author and her father is a 5-time Grammy Award Winning recording artist. Emily is a proud Nashville native who is married and has 3 children, and we're very grateful that she could take some time to join us today. So Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jamie. I'm honored.
Yeah, this is a great honor for me as well. I grew up listening to your father's music and even went to many of his concerts, actually.
Nice. Me too. We share that in common. Lots of SEC music growing up.
Did you have a favorite song of his?
Oh, I have a couple. Well, it'd be hard to say just a couple, but the few that come to mind, interestingly, my daughter accidentally bought a subscription to Apple Music on my phone. And so I've been going back and listening to all of his very old records that were made when I was really young. And so it's been fun to kind of dig up some of the old songs that I'm not quite as familiar with. And then other ones will surprise me. I'll all of a sudden be singing along. And I'm like, man, that's somewhere deep in my memory. But 2 favorites would be My Redeemer is Faithful and True, and Angel's Wish, which is one that kind of got lost in all the shuffle on the Declaration record, but I really liked that one.
Are there some songs, going back, you say listening to the old ones, are there some songs you just shake your head at and wonder, Dad, what were you thinking when you did this song?
Well, songs, there's a couple that like have some thick 80s vibes going on that I'm like, wow, impressive. It's more the hairdos that I shake my head and go, what were you thinking? That mullet. Wow, that was an impressive mullet. Or shake my head at my mom going, how did he convince you that this was a good idea? No, just kidding.
Hey, that was hot back then.
I know, I suppose. Yeah, that's why I hear.
That was quite the thing. And you know, the music, I saw him once in concert with DC Talk.
Nice. Okay.
And I'm sure that Toby McKeon kind of shakes his head at some of the songs that DC Talk came out with. But, you know, at the time, they were pretty good songs.
Yeah, right. So, I think my dad, like, he shakes his head often at the Got to Be True little rap that made its way onto the Great Adventure CD. But I don't know. I've heard that sometimes if mom is in the city and dad's performing, they like to do that as a duet together. She comes out on the stage and maybe offers the rapping piece to the song, which good Lord knows that my mom is not cut out to be a rapper. So it's probably a very entertaining moment in the set.
Well, that expanded his musical talents a little bit.
Oh, yes. Yes, it did.
So what was it like growing up as the daughter of somebody that was famous or in the public eye? Yeah,
so, you know, this question's always fun and funny to me because the first part of it, I go, well, it's how I grew up. You know, was what I knew. But at the same time, you know, as I was sort of growing up, Dad's career kind of grew on the same little timeline as me growing up. And so as I got a little bit older and socially, you know, settings, I kind of became a little bit more aware of settings. Dad was kind of gaining popularity. And so it was definitely a very unique upbringing to walk into rooms and situations where you were not familiar and didn't know people, but they all felt very familiar and knew a lot of your story because of the way that Dad shares our story through his music. And we all want him to because it's very much so a ministry that we feel like our family's been called to together. And so, yeah, it was so fun, you know, and I'm very proud of my dad and very proud of his accomplishments and not, records, accolades, all those fun things, but his accomplishments and how he has very faithfully stewarded the story God's given him and proclaimed the gospel time and time again. on mountaintops and valleys, and I'm proud of him.
Your parents had quite a platform, and they gained additional popularity by adopting. They certainly weren't the first people to adopt children from overseas, but they were high-profile people that became adoption advocates. Where did the idea for adoption come from for your family, and where did those passions originate for you?
Yeah, definitely. Mom and I had the opportunity to travel to Haiti when I was in fifth grade, and it was my first time really out of the country. It was my first time in a setting where need was so obvious and so prevalent. And we went with an organization. We were sponsoring a child through the organization. And the little girl, we went to meet her and spend some time. And she was my same age at the time. And so it was really eye-opening and kind of gave me all these things rumbling around in my head as to how to respond to the need of children kind of around the world. And so we came back from Haiti, and I was convinced that our family, we were supposed to become missionaries and move overseas. And my mom and dad were like, I don't really think that's going to work with Dad's career, and maybe that's not exactly the response to this trip. But in the middle of all that, had befriended somebody here locally who was going to church with the family, and her family was in the process of adopting a little boy here domestically. And so that kind of planted the seed for adoption in my mind, and really began, my dad calls it campaigning. I call it persuasion, but began praying and really challenging my parents, I guess, to consider expanding our family through adoption. And you know what, Jamie, it's really interesting. I sometimes now I'll talk to my husband and be like, I just wish my prayer life could get back to how it was when I was in fifth grade. I think that's something to do with just childlike faith and the innocence of just really believing in something and not being held back by fear or even like logistics, right, of how is this actually going to work. And I was really convinced that God had it in store for our family, that we would welcome a child into our family through adoption. And so I prayed very unrelentingly for it, and would write letters to my parents and leave them on their pillows when they went to bed. And like, I may or may not have said things like, you could be living in disobedience to God's will if you choose not to adopt. So I was kind of a firecracker. And, but you know what, honestly, God in his great grace works what I would call a miracle in my parents' heart. And it kind of all coincided with me deciding to let go of my own ambitions and will, and implore God that if this was something he had for our family, that he would lead my parents toward it. And he did. In crazy series of events that only God could orchestrate, we adopted my three younger sisters from China. I mean, at three different times, but over the series of a couple of years, they joined our family from 2000 to 2004. So yeah, so I have three sisters from China.
Well, excellent. And then your parents started Show Hope, the agency that you're the vice president for now. Talk a little bit about what Show Hope does and some of the neat things that you guys are doing.
So we Mom and Dad founded Show Hope in 2003. So kind of in the middle of all of the adoption journey unfolding for our family. We came back from China after adopting Shoei, my oldest sister, and there were a lot of families that came to us, I mean, really before we even got from the airport to our car, and said, man, we would really consider adopting, but financially we just can't overcome that initial hurdle that intercountry or domestic adoption costs. You know, average adoption costs can be somewhere between $25,000 and $40,000, and that is a big chunk of change to just have sitting between a family and even just finalizing the adoption process. Then you have ongoing therapies or medical expenses if you're bringing a child home with medical needs. And so Mom and Dad didn't want money to ever stand in the way between children that need families and families that are willing to bring them home through adoption. And so that's really where Show Hope began. My dad jokes that my mom started writing checks and my dad couldn't write enough songs to keep up with her checks and looked around. They were not looking to really start an organization, but there was nobody in those early 2000s that were doing adoption aid grants. And so that's where Show Hope began to give financial assistance to Christian families that are adopting. And so, yeah, that's kind of where it all was birthed in my parents' heart, and to raise awareness through my dad's platform of the need of children living as orphans, both globally and domestically here in the States, and what the church's response should be to that.
You might have just dropped one of the best lines I've ever had on my podcast. My mom was writing checks and my dad couldn't write enough songs to cover those checks.
Well, I stole it from my dad, so it's his line, but yeah.
Well played. I like that. So what do you kind of do on a daily basis with Show Hope as the vice president?
Well, on the daily basis right now, we're about, organizationally, we're about 15 years old, and kind of going from that entrepreneurial sort of stage and formalizing. And so we're in the strategic planning process, and I'm leading that process for the organization. And so that's a lot of what I'm doing right now, as well as managing the team here, a lot of oversight on our communications and just kind of how we're messaging to our audience, our story, and how we advocate for these kids in a way that really dignifies them and this place in their story that's a really hard place, but yet there's so much beauty that can come out of it, and them being welcomed into a family. And so that's kind of what my day-to-day looks like here at Show Hope.
Well, when you were growing up, and then you ended up going away to college in Texas, I believe, right? Baylor University?
Yes, Sick 'em Bears. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Baylor Bears. And now when you went to Baylor, when you're going through college, did you anticipate one day going into ministry or one day going into nonprofits, or what was kind of your future plans when you went to Baylor?
Yeah, that's a great question. My future plans about a year into Baylor was I'm just going to drop out because there's need now and I need to respond. And I'm thankful that God put some great guidance around me to say, yes, there is great need, and yes, you need to respond, but let's finish your education. And so I knew early on, I mean, I went to school as a nursing major and then switched to pre-med with this idea that I would go international and kind of help through kind of medical missions, and then very, very quickly learned that I am not a science brain at all, that I think I did receive some of the creative and writing genes from my mom and dad, not the musical genes, but the writing genes, and switched to international studies and religion as a minor, and really enjoyed, exploring classes about global issues, international politics, and the way different governments are structured. And I was able to take foreign language through that course studies, and then went on to get my master's in theology, and didn't really realize how it would all kind of come together, but it has really come together nicely for me in the role that I have here at Show Hope. So I think I knew nonprofit work / ministry was definitely what I was passionate about. I just didn't know what it was going to look like.
You mentioned that you didn't really get much musical ability. So you don't play any instruments, do any of that kind of stuff?
So I grew up playing piano. We all took piano lessons, and I think I took piano lessons the longest out of the siblings, because my brothers early on were, started gravitating toward drums and guitar, which they still play to this day. So I can kind of pound out Twinkle Twinkle Little Star on the piano, but nothing that is going to really get me anywhere, any gigs or anything like that, for sure. So I enjoy music. I enjoy singing. I can appreciate it, but I don't have the gift like my dad and my brothers do.
Did you ever appear on stage with your dad at a concert?
I did. I sang Down by the Bay at any concert I was at when I was a little girl with my dad.
Nice.
Yes.
And everybody loves you, the cute kid.
Yes, everybody they have fond memories of me just rocking Down by the Bay, for sure.
Excellent. Back in January, you traveled to Washington, D.C. to speak at the Evangelicals for Life conference, and you shared the stage with people like Joni Eareckson Tada and NFL player Benjamin Watson. What was that experience like?
Oh, man, incredibly humbling. First and foremost, I think I still wake up on any given day and in these situations I find myself and just pinch myself and go, my goodness, how did I get here? I'm extremely blessed to be in these situations. I feel like I have, it's really a profound thing to know when you take the stage, and I'm representing Show Hope. I'm representing the work that we do and advocating for children that are waiting for family. It is really humbling to know that in a way you're speaking on behalf of this group of children that for any given reason, this little moment in time, they don't have a voice as loud as others. And so you're representing that story. And I think you have to tread with great humility and great wisdom into that world. And so, yeah, it's very humbling and obviously very exciting. I mean, to be alongside people like you just mentioned, these great heroes of the faith that are living such just testimonies of God's goodness in the public eye. It was an incredible experience.
There's no doubt Emily is doing so many great things with Show Hope. You know, they're having a lasting impact on so many people. They break down barriers that exist between waiting children and loving families. And just like they're trying to provide hope and a strong future for so many youngsters, we also have a strong passion for the youth. Our book, The Leadership Playbook, Become Your Team's Most Valuable Leader, is packed full of practical insights and stories to help student athletes become better teammates and more positive leaders. Please check out theleadershipplaybook.com for more information. And now back to this great conversation with Emily Chapman Richards.
When you aren't working for Show Hope and serving as an advocate for adoption, what is it that you do? What are you passionate about?
Yeah, so my primary job and primary commitment in life, I'm a wife and a mom, first and foremost, before I'm a VP here at Show Hope. And so when I am not here in the office, I am with my little ones. I've got 3 girls. They're 6, 3, and 2. And I really, really just enjoy being with them. And my husband, supporting him in his job. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing when I'm not here.
Well, I was a basketball coach for a few years at a small school in Indiana called Anderson University.
Oh, yes.
Which is where your parents met.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, they don't know me. They were before me, but they have an interesting story where they shared a mailbox because your mom's last name is actually still her married name.
Yes, yes. So my mom's maiden name was Chapman, and so she never had to go through the rigmarole that all of us females have to go through when we change our last names. I'm like, see, you didn't actually like change your social security or your passport like just to say Chapman. And she's like, no, I didn't go through all of that. I already said Chapman. I'm like, see, you have no sympathy for us that have to do all of this paperwork. But yes, my mom's maiden name is Chapman. And so they were assigned a mailbox together as freshmen at Anderson. And so a lot of times they would accidentally get each other's mail mixed up. And so that's sort of how they met and knew one another, Steve Chapman, Mary Beth Chapman, and give each other their letters that they accidentally received on behalf of one another and that kind of thing. And I kind of became friends and then found that they were liking each other more than just being friends and started dating. And the story goes that my dad asked my mom if she wanted to share a mailbox with him forever. And she said yes. So they're still sharing a mailbox.
Do you have any kind of a similar story for how you met your husband, Tanner?
Mailboxes were not involved, but I met my husband on a blind date at a Starbucks. So it's kind of an equally, I guess, just surprising story. And neither him or I were like the blind date type of people, but we had mutual friends that were convinced we should meet. And I mean, we were both born and raised here in Franklin. In fact, we found a picture when we were 9 years old. We were both at the same birthday party and we're both in the picture, but we didn't remember that, or that we didn't know each other like as friends growing up. And so we met. I was finishing my undergrad at Baylor and I was home on a break here in Tennessee, and he was here working for his family's business. And we met at Starbucks, and that was the rest of the story, I guess.
Well, that might not be a mailbox story, but that's a pretty good story, especially with you having a picture of you guys together, but you didn't really know each other.
Yes, that was pretty. I mean, we found that a couple months after we started dating. Our mutual friends were like, "Look, you were both at at my birthday party when we were 9." Like, that's crazy. And it is not the mailbox story, but this is really bizarre. Those mutual friends that introduced us to one another, we grew up like great family friends with this family. And so we would spend, because my parents weren't originally from here and this other family wasn't originally from here, we would spend like Christmas Eve together. We were kind of like family, friends that are family. And so we would spend Christmas Eve together. And I have many memories falling asleep at their house and all that kind of stuff and being carried in, to the car and home by my parents is late at night. Well, these mutual friends sold that childhood home to my husband's families. And so I have memories in his childhood home. So it's kind of crazy. But yeah, so small world.
That's a pretty good story. Do you like to read? Do you like to listen to podcasts? If so, what are some that you would recommend?
Okay, so I do love to read, and I'm reading a book right now called Love, Kindness that my dad recommended to me. The president of Baylor University wrote it, and I am really enjoying that, and it's convicting me. Just this idea of choosing to lead a life of kindness, and not kindness that's this just a passivity, but like a really like a choice to show people the kindness that Jesus showed in his life when he lived here on earth. And so that's been really profound. As far as podcasts, I've got little ones, so I try to be creative in how to pull their attention away from the ever tempting screen. And so we like to listen to audiobooks and that kind of thing. But we've been listening to Wow in the World, which is the NPR podcast for little ones. Like, they're kind of science and like interesting things about nature and the world. You have to use, depending on what you believe about how the world came about, you have to use a little discretion around some of the content, but a lot of it is really interesting. I've learned a lot of things, even about why onions make you cry and these sorts of things. So I listen to that. And then I like to listen to, from time to time, I'll listen to the On Being podcast, which is with NPR. And I just think it's a really fascinating exploration of different people. They might not believe the same as me necessarily, but just an exploration of spirituality and how they've come to find meaning in life. And just, I don't know, I find it interesting to listen to other people's perspectives. So I really enjoy that.
Well, speaking of books, in 2017, your dad came out with a book, Between Heaven and the Real World, and you started reading it to your kids. Did they take to Grandpa's book?
Yes, they loved it. And my oldest particularly wanted me to keep reading. And there's parts of our story that we just have to navigate a little uniquely and are kind of trying to figure out how we will pass the legacy of God's goodness and his provision in some hard times to our children. And so we're still kind of navigating that. So we kind of just trailed off reading after a little bit because we need to figure out how to navigate some of the latter chapters in the book.
Some of that navigation you talk about is no doubt related to the tragedy your family experienced in 2008 with the unexpected loss of your sister Maria. Many people experience loss at some point in their life, though maybe not at the magnitude or the sudden nature, I should say, as you guys did. Is there any advice or thoughts that you might have for people that could help them through a loss when it does occur in their lives?
Yeah. Well, I think I definitely don't think you can ever quantify suffering. And so the magnitude of our accident was certainly shocking and surprising. But, loss is loss. And I think as a Christian, and how I believe and perceive the world to be, I just don't think humanity was really designed with this way to kind of even conceptualize of loss, or made for the garden state in a sense. And so I think loss, in any expression of loss, is such a profound sort of like offense to even our humanity. And so I think it's shocking no matter what. If it's a diagnosis, it's a loss of a job, it's a loss of a family member, a loss of a relationship, a loss of a dream. I mean, any of that is so shocking. And so advice, oh my goodness, everybody grieves very differently. And so I think extending grace to yourself and those around you in that situation to know that you're gonna grieve entirely differently. My husband and I have had to walk our own very unique paths in grieving the loss of my sister, and how we express it to our children and all of that. It continues to be an everyday discussion. But I think just having, extending grace to yourself as you navigate those waters and others. Of course, I found great solace in my faith in Christ, and some great books that helped me kind of navigate the loss. I loved C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed. Nicholas Wolsterstorff wrote a book called A Lament for a Son, and those two books to me were kind of like these journals of people that had gone ahead of me grieving deep loss, but came out believing in God's goodness still. And so I really clung to those in the early days.
As you guys went through that, and we all have times when we have people, friends, family, who experience loss, who are grieving. What would be your advice, having gone through something like that, for us to then say or do or not say or not do to people who are going through loss?
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question, and a question I really appreciate. I think it's unique for everybody, but something that was helpful for me and has continued to stand the test of time were the friends that were just present, or even continue to remain present. And, on the anniversary of the accident, or maybe on Maria's birthday, just even a simple text like, hey, just remembering you today. That presence speaks so profoundly to a grieving heart. I think of Jesus in the New Testament when Lazarus has died, and Mary and Martha are so mad because they had sent for Jesus and he didn't come right away, and now Lazarus is dead. And I guess, and Jesus is like omniscient, knowing what's about to happen. He's going to raise Lazarus from the dead, but he in that moment when he has to confront Mary and Martha in their grief, he's just present. And that's the point in Scripture where we read Jesus wept. He just was there and grieved with them. And there wasn't a little mini sermon or, hey, you guys better stop crying, I'm about to do something amazing. In that moment, he just was with them and with them in their grief. And I think that, to me, words, while they're well-meaning, can sometimes add to the injury. And so just presence, bringing somebody their favorite coffee, or, just little things like that are really meaningful in those sad moments. And I think depending on your friendship with somebody who's walking through grief, just asking them that question is helpful. Like, do you want to talk about your sister? Do you want to talk about, what was your favorite thing about her? For me personally, yeah, it's really helpful to talk about remembering my sister, because there's nothing else. There's not a lot of other times or places where I feel freedom to like just remember her or think about her, unless I kind of go there in my own mind and thoughts. And so it is really helpful when a friend's like, hey, tell me about what one of your favorite memories was with her. Or do you remember, did your sister like this? Or that kind of thing is really meaningful to me. But I think asking your friends that are going through a hard season, if they, do you want to talk about it, or do you need some space? And then from there, just, ask them about what their favorite memories or what they miss most about their loved one. Those kind of things, to me, are really helpful.
And have you found that through Show Hope? Show Hope was founded before the tragedy, but have you had opportunities to help others through your story?
Yeah. God's been so gracious it's that way of bringing beauty out of the ashes. And when Maria passed away shortly thereafter, my parents just asked, and, in lieu of flowers or gifts being sent to our family, to consider giving a donation to Show Hope. We set up a fund called Maria's Miracle Fund here, and we're absolutely blown away the amount of money and just love for our family that poured in. Through that, we were able to really kind of get off the ground the running of our first special care center in China that we care for medically vulnerable children that have been orphaned in central China. And so at any given time, we now have 5 care centers in China that we support. And we have about 250 kids at any given time living there. Over the history of really the last 10 years, we've cared for a little over 2,500 kids in those care centers. And again, these are children with pretty profound physical and intellectual disabilities. And I mean, it's just incredible. Like, would this have been possible without losing Maria? I don't know. I don't know how God works. And the sting is still there. I'd love to have her back, but that's not a reality this side of heaven. And so then you do look at the way God has used that tragedy to put the work of Show Hope, or just put the message of loving others kind of out on a global stage in a way. And it has been incredibly profound to see the way that God is bringing beauty even out of this very hard story through the lives of all these little ones that are receiving healing and hope and thriving because of the care that they're able to receive in China.
Emily, where can people connect with you or learn more about what you guys are doing with Show Hope?
Yeah, so you can check out the Show Hope website. That's www.showhope.org. You can also check out my website, emilychapmanrichards.com, and on there you'll find links to my Facebook and my Twitter. You can search me on Instagram. Follow me. I'd love for you to see little glimpses of my life and share stories of it's mostly pictures of my girls. But if you want to see that, you're welcome to follow me. But yeah, so that's where you can find more information.
That's great. I know you're busy with being the vice president of Show Hope and also being a mother of 3.
Yes.
That is not easy at all. So we do appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Jamie.
That was such an enjoyable interview with Emily. She has a lot of enthusiasm and passion for what she is doing. As someone that has gone through the adoption process when my wife and I adopted Jalen, I have a keen interest in what Emily is doing with Show Hope. This organization is bettering the lives of so many people, both children and adults. So please check out their website at showhope.org. Also, if you haven't already done so, please click that little subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any of our great future episodes, just like this one today with Emily Chapman Richards. So thanks so much, and until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?